Hey everybody, so in this video I'm going to talk about how to get your timing right on the MCAT. Now, I'm going to focus on the two science and the psych social section because they have the same timing, but a lot of the general things that I say here are going to apply to the cars section as well. So do keep in mind that this timing applies only to those three sections, but there's a lot of general stuff applying to the other sections. And now timing is I would say like one of the most important skills or aspects for the MCAT. If you're running out of time on a section, of course, you're not having enough time to answer questions and you're leaving points on the table, which is a really unfortunate way to hurt yourself on this test. So that's not a good thing, obviously. But almost as bad is if you're finishing the test with more than like 10, 15 minutes to spare on a section. That's also bad timing. And that also means that you're leaving time on the table here that you could have otherwise spent answering questions and getting questions right that you got wrong. So I would say if you're routinely getting less than like a 130 on a particular test section, and you're leaving more than like 15 minutes, you're finishing with more than like 15 minutes left, then you're probably screwing up your timing, to be honest. So for example, for me, the psych-soc section, I would always end up with about like 20 to 30 minutes left. I would finish that section really quickly, but I was doing well on that section. So like that wasn't, the timing there wasn't too big of a concern. But again, if you're leaving time on the table and you're routinely scoring below like a 130, that's a problem with your timing as well. I just want to make that point that timing is not just about finishing all the questions in time. It's also about making sure that you take the maximum amount of time that you can and that you don't leave any points or any questions on the table that you could have answered either because you run out of time or because you didn't read the question carefully enough and you tried to go too fast. And so this is where the idea of pacing yourself comes in. So again, I've talked about this before, but these three sections, this is the breakdown of their format, 59 questions, 95 minutes. And for estimation purposes, I always say it's about 60 questions and 90 minutes. That gives you a small bit of a cushion. That's about 1.5 minutes per question. Now, what that means is this actually breaks down relatively neatly. After about 30 minutes, you should be done with 20 questions. After about 60 minutes, you should be done with 40 questions. And after about 90 minutes, you should be done with 59 questions or done with the passage. And that leaves you, again, about 5 minutes as a cushion or as a buffer in between these. And so what I do when I take this section or when I take any of these three sections is before I start the section, I'll actually write out on my test. I'll write this out on my test. So I'll say, but I won't do 30 minutes because of course, on the MCAT, you get a timer, you get a countdown timer, right? So I'll actually write out, say 65 minutes because of course it starts at 95. So I'll say 65 minutes. I should be done with 20 questions. And then I'll say at about 35 minutes left, I should be done with 40 questions. And another way you can kind of do this is at the halfway point, which is about 45 minutes, you should be done with 30 questions. Right? And then what I'll do is I'll follow the timer. And when I get to this, for example, what I'll do is I'll write out, let's say I'm ahead of schedule. So I'll do 22. I'll write out, I got to 22 questions. So I finished 22 questions here. So this means that I'm ahead of schedule. And that's good. It means I can slow down a little bit. Now, 22 questions is not too far ahead, so it doesn't mean I can slow down too much. And it probably means that I'm at a pretty good pace. So I'm going to try and keep maintaining this pace. Try to keep maintaining the pace that I'm at now. Right? Let's say I finish and I'm only at 18 questions. I mean, that's a cause for concern a little bit. So I should speed up, but it's not too terrible. So I should speed up a little bit, but I shouldn't like freak out and go too fast. You never want to kind of overcorrect too much. So for example, let's say you're at 22 questions finished and then you're like, oh, I have plenty of time. And then you really slow down. So maybe by the time you get here, you're at like 35 questions because you slowed down so much. And so that's not good. So it's always better, if you're a little bit ahead of schedule, it's always better to kind of keep going and leave yourself a little bit of time to spare. So at this type of a pace, you're not going to end up with like half an hour remaining. And those of you who run or who play sports understand the concept of pacing yourself, understand the concept of if I want to finish, say, this mile in this amount of time, I have to finish half of it in half the amount of time. I don't want to go too fast because I'll burn out and it'll be too hard. And I don't want to go too slow because then I'll have to go too fast toward the end and it'll mess me up. So I want to maintain a consistent pace, more or less. And so again, I recommend you write this out on your test and you write out next to it as you get to each of these milestones, whether you've met the milestone, exceeded it a little bit, or gone a little bit too slow. And then that gives you a good sense for how you want to adjust your timing in the future. Now, I don't recommend you pace yourself like more than this. So for example, I don't particularly recommend that you could do every 10 questions. How much time do you have left? So if you understand this, every 10 questions, you should be done in about 15 minutes. But I find that trying to pace yourself that often, or doing this kind of check-in too often, first of all, it takes up too much time. You don't want to spend too much time worrying about your timing, ironically. But also the questions vary in difficulty. So maybe the first 10 questions are really easy, but then the next 10 questions are really hard, relatively speaking. And so you kind of end up, there's some inconsistency when you break it down at such a small, at a level like per question. So I think that this type of a breakdown where you do maybe about 2 check-ins, so check-in number 1, check-in number 2, and maybe a halfway point check-in as well. I find that that's about the maximum amount of worrying that you should be doing for your timing. And again, that's roughly speaking. If you, for example, finish 10 questions and you look and you're like, wow, I feel like that took a long time, it might be worth checking on the clock to see how long that took. If you're actually behind schedule or if you're ahead of schedule. And again, as always, the rule of thumb is 1 times 1.5, right? So I finished 10 questions. I felt like that took a long time. Let me see, am I really behind schedule? Well, that's 15 minutes. So those 10 questions should have taken me 15 minutes. Now I look at the clock. How much time has gone by, right? So it's a 95-minute timer. 95 minus whatever. Let's say the timer says 77. So 95 minus 77. What's 95 minus 77? 77, 87, 97. That's 18 minutes, right? So those 10 questions took me 18 minutes. So yeah, I'm a little bit behind schedule. Let's try and speed up a little bit, right? That's only, again, if you really feel like you're behind schedule, and you will get a good sense of this after you've done the million practice tests that you're going to do for this exam. So don't feel like you're not going to have a sense for that now when you're starting studying. Again, hopefully by the time you're done, you should build that intuition pretty well. And the way that I recommend, by the way, you build that intuition is when you do practice questions. So for example, let's say you're doing the section banks. Do the section banks with timing, and do them with a timer. Assume a timer of 1.5 minutes per question. So maybe you're going to do 15 section bank questions at a time. So give yourself 15. What's 15 times 1.5? 15 times 1.5. I actually don't know. That's going to be what, 22.5? Something like that, right? We could multiply it out. Let's multiply it out. 5 times 5 is 25. 5, carry the 2. 1 times 5 is 5 plus 2 is 7. 7. Okay. 0. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 1 is 1. So what is that? Sorry, we ran out of space down there. So yeah, it's 2, 2, 5. So 22.5. That's about 22.5 minutes. So set a timer if you want to do these 15 questions, set a timer for 22.5, and then make sure you finish those questions in that amount of time. And again, that'll give you a good sense or give it good intuition for how to get these types of questions done in that amount of time. Now, the other point I want to make is about how the test is structured. So another reason, so I talked previously about why you don't want to necessarily check in every 10 questions or so. You want to do the 20 questions, 40 questions, and 60 questions. And part of the reason is that the questions are of different difficulty. So the test, of course, is broken down into discrete questions, which I've highlighted in brown. There are about 15 of them per section. And then we've got these passage-based questions. And there are about 44 of them, roughly, per exam, right, or per section. And the discrete questions are going to be a lot faster than the passage-based questions, and that's normal. It should take you should be very fast at these discrete questions and a lot slower at the passage-based questions. You should take the time to read the passages and understand them, and you should be able to do the discrete ones quickly. And just something that I recommend, you really don't have to do this, but when I start the test, I like to jump to the end and do these last discrete questions first. And to me, it just sort of helps me get into the groove. Jumping into the test dry without having and trying to force myself to read this first passage, I really, it takes me a while to kind of get into that groove. So I'll jump in. I'll do these three or four discrete questions at the end, and then I will start with these passage-based questions. And then what I'll do usually is I will do these passage-based questions. Okay, I'm done with these passage-based questions. Now I get to do these discrete ones, these passages. So I sort of think of the test in these types of chunks where each set of passages plus discrete questions is its own sort of section. And then these I move down again at the end onto the beginning of the test. The discrete questions are sort of a nice break from the passage-based questions, and they sort of help you to catch up on time if you're a little bit behind schedule, because again, that's kind of what they're meant to do. So just in terms of like approaching the section, this is what I recommend. And again, as I said before, in general, I don't recommend you check in or you do this type of timing check-in until you've finished one of these types of sections. So you finish 3 discrete questions plus, let's say, 8 questions. That's 11 questions, right? That's 11 questions. Okay, so now we finished 11 questions. Let's see how long that took us. So 11 questions we should be done with in 1.5 minutes. That's going to be about what, like 16 or 17 minutes, right? 16 to 17 minutes. Again, times 1.5. And you can use that method to check in. One final point, when I mentioned previously, when I mentioned over here that when you're doing section banks, when you're doing section bank questions, I recommend you do this timing of 1.5 minutes per question. When you do section banks, I would recommend you do them in this way, where you pair up a set of discrete questions with a set of like 2 or 3 passages. So that will really help you make sure that the timing is accurate, because if you're just doing passages, they're going to take you a little bit longer. And if you're just doing discrete questions, they're going to take you less time. And so by pairing them up, you end up with an average of 1.5 minutes. Again, this is only an average because some of these passages are going to be harder than maybe these passages. And so this is how I recommend you approach timing when it comes to the MCAT. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or leave them in the comments down below. And thank you for watching.